How dare you question my strategy? The scream did not echo. It slammed into me, wet with spit and rage. It was not just a shout, it was a sonic weapon deployed in a room built for acoustics. He leaned over the podium, his face flushing a dangerous blotchy violet under the harsh auditorium lights. "I am trying to save this quarter, and you are peddling fear," he bellowed, pointing a shaking finger at where I sat in the front row. "You are a mid-level analyst with a calculator. I am the visionary here. If you cannot get on board with the acceleration protocol, then get out of my press conference." He was not done. He turned to the 30 journalists and the live stream cameras, grinning. "Ladies and gentlemen, excuse my lead engineer. He lacks the stomach for the future we are building. He thinks structural curing is a fixed law of physics. I say physics works for us. I did not pack my bag. I did not run. I did not cry. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, feeling the vibrations of the floorboards as he paced the stage. I watched him dismantle my 5 years of stress test data with a single arrogant wave of his hand. He wanted the mega bridge finished in 18 months, not 36. He wanted the bonus attached to the early completion clause. I stood up slowly. The room was heavy with secondhand embarrassment. I looked him dead in the center of his forehead, nodded once, an acknowledgement of receipt, not submission, and walked out the side door. I left my credentials on the chair. He thought that was the end of it. He thought he had crushed me into the pavement like wet gravel. He did not know that while he was celebrating his victory lap, the people who actually owned the money he was spending were dialing my number. Before we get into what happened when I picked up that phone and how I made him pay for every single word he screamed that day, I want to share how we arrived at that podium. My name is Keith Vance. I am 48 years old. I do not have a charismatic personality. I am not the life of the party. I do not understand social cues very well, and I often forget to smile when I enter a room. I breathe heavy infrastructure. While other kids played with toys, I was obsessing over suspension cables and aggregate ratios. To me, the world is not made of feelings or intentions. It is made of loads and resistances. Bridges are not just steel and concrete. They are living, breathing math. They hold millions of lives up against gravity. When I look at a span crossing a bay, I do not see a scenic view. I see a constant, desperate war between the weight of the cars and the tensile strength of the cables. It is a beautiful, dangerous war, and I have dedicated my entire life to ensuring gravity never wins. I was the lead structural engineer for the Bayview Crossing project. It was the kind of job you work 26 years to get. It was supposed to be my masterpiece. Then came Julian Thorne. Julian was different. He came from private equity. He did not know a kilonewton from a kilogram. He saw the bridge project not as a feat of engineering, but as a leverageable asset on a balance sheet. He did not know the difference between tensile strength and shear force, and he did not care. He was tall, wore suits that cost more than my father's car, and spoke in buzzwords that meant nothing but sounded expensive. He had been brought in by the board to streamline the operation. In his mind, engineering safety margins were just wasted budget waiting to be recaptured. He only cared about the completion bonus, a payout so massive it would secure his legacy and his beach house in the Maldives. The conflict started small. A meeting here, an email there. He would ask why we were using grade 5 steel when grade 4 was cheaper. I would explain the salt air corrosion factors. He would roll his eyes and tap his pen on the glossy surface of the boardroom table, looking at his watch. "Keith," he would say, stretching my name out, like it was a chore to pronounce. "You engineers are so quaint. You think in decades. I think in quarters. We need to move faster. Physics does not care about your fiscal quarter, Julian," I told him once. Gravity does not negotiate. He hated that. He hated anything that refused to negotiate. He believed his charisma could bend the physical laws of nature just as easily as it bent the board of directors. But concrete does not listen to smooth talking, and steel does not care about quarterly targets. We were heading for a disaster, and I was the only barrier standing in his way. The breaking point began 9 months ago. For 9 months, I had flagged the concrete mixture. The timeline he had sold to the board was impossible. Concrete takes time to cure. It is a chemical reaction. If you rush it, it does not bond correctly. To meet his accelerated timeline, he had switched suppliers to a firm using rapid set compounds. This supplier promised they could pour and set a section in half the time of standard industrial concrete. Julian saw it as a miracle. I saw it as a death trap. My models showed that in high-wind scenarios, the rigidity would cause microscopic fractures. Standard concrete has a little give, it can flex. This rapid-set stuff was too brittle. It would be fine on a calm day, but the bridge was being built in a typhoon zone. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon, the wind would hit it wrong. I tried to show him the simulations. He called them pessimistic algorithms. I remember walking into his office 4 weeks before the press conference. The air conditioning was set to a freezing temperature, and he was standing by the window, looking out at the construction site in the distance. "I need you to sign off on the Sector 7 pour," he said without turning around. "I cannot do that, Julian," I said. I had a folder in my hand containing the core samples. I tried to show them to him. He turned then, a fake, tight smile plastered on his face. "Keith, you are being difficult. The supplier is certified. The supplier manufactures patio foundations. Julian, not megastructures. Look at this." I placed a jagged chunk of gray rock on his pristine desk. "This is from the test pour. It looks solid, right? But look under the microscope. It is honeycombed. The heat from the rapid curing created air pockets." He picked up the rock, weighed it in his hand, and then dropped it into the trash can. He called them expensive paperweights. "We are pouring Sector 7 on Monday," he said, "with or without your signature." "If you pour that concrete," I said, my voice trembling not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of his stupidity, "I will refuse to certify the safety rating. You will not get your occupancy permit." He looked at me then, and the fake smile vanished. In its place was something cold and reptilian. "You are an employee, Keith. You are replaceable. The timeline is not." He needed me gone because I was the only person who refused to sign the safety certification for the new timeline. But he could not just fire me. I had tenure, and I had a reputation in the industry. If he fired me quietly, I would talk, I would write articles, I would go to the safety board. He needed to destroy me. That is why he invited me to the press conference. He told me we were going to announce a revised schedule. I thought, foolishly, that he had finally listened to reason. I thought he was going to announce a delay to allow for proper curing times. I walked into that auditorium with a sense of relief. I sat in the front row, ready to support him in doing the right thing. Then he started speaking. "We are not just building a bridge," he told the cameras. "We are building a testament to speed and efficiency. We are shattering the old ways of doing things." I felt a knot form in my stomach. This was not a delay announcement. "Some people," he said, his gaze drifting down to me, "some people are stuck in the past. They cling to old data like a security blanket." And then came the scream. The moment he decided to sacrifice my career on the altar of his ego. By screaming at me in public, he was not just firing me. He was discrediting me preemptively, so that if I went to the press, I would look like a disgruntled employee he had already dressed down. It was a calculated assassination of my character. Walking out of that room was the hardest thing I have ever done. Every instinct in my body wanted to scream back, to jump on the stage and grab the microphone and explain the chemistry of hydration heat to the reporters. But I knew it would not matter. He was the visionary. I was just the man with the calculator who did not believe in his dream. I walked out the side door, down the long concrete corridor of the stadium, and into the bright, blinding afternoon sun. I did not have a car waiting. I took the subway home, surrounded by people who had no idea that the man on the news was planning to build them a tomb. That evening, I sat in my apartment staring at the blank wall. My apartment was sparse. I did not have much furniture, just books, models of trusses, and a drafting station. The silence in the room was absolute. I felt hollowed out. 5 years of my life erased in 5 minutes of shouting. My phone buzzed. I ignored it. It buzzed again and again. I looked at the screen. It was not my mother. It was not a recruiter. It was an unknown number. I considered throwing the phone across the room. I assumed it was a journalist looking for a quote, looking to get the disgruntled employee's side of the story so they could mock it, but it did not stop buzzing. I picked it up. "What?" I snapped. "We saw the live stream," a voice said, low, gravelly, older. I froze. The voice did not sound like a journalist. It sounded like old money. It sounded like oak rooms and cigars and decisions that moved borders. "Who is this?" I asked. "I represent the consortium," the voice said, "and I have 3 others on the line. The consortium. My breath caught in my throat. In the world of heavy infrastructure, the consortium was a myth that turned out to be real. The silent money, the group of institutional investors and sovereign funds that were actually financing the bridge. Most people think the government pays for these bridges. They do not up front. Private equity groups front the cash, billions of dollars, and they get paid back over 42 years through tolls and leases. They were the ones writing the multi-billion-dollar checks that my vice president was so eager to cash. They rarely spoke to anyone below the executive suite. They certainly never called engineers on their personal cell phones at 9 p.m. on a Thursday. He claims you are risk-averse, the second voice said. This voice was sharp, cutting. He claims his new timeline saves us $300 million in labor costs. I gripped the phone. Julian had already spun the narrative. He had framed his public outburst as a cost-saving measure. He is wrong, I said, my voice steady. I did not stutter. I did not apologize. The fear I had felt in the auditorium was gone, replaced by the cold clarity of facts. Explain, the first voice commanded. The rapid set compound creates heat pockets during the curing process, I said. The internal structure will honeycomb. It will hold for the ribbon cutting, but the first seasonal typhoon will turn that bridge into a pile of gravel in the bay. There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause where billions of dollars hang in the balance. Can you prove it? The third voice asked. I already did, I replied. He deleted the models from the central server this morning, but I remember the math. I closed my eyes, visualizing the equations. I could see the stress fractures propagating through the virtual concrete in my mind. I knew the load limits. I knew the shear coefficients. Julian could delete files, but he could not delete the laws of physics from my brain. We do not need the models, the first voice said. We need to know if you are willing to bet your career on that math. I laughed. It was a dry, brittle sound. I just lost my career, I replied. I have nothing left to bet. Good, the voice said, because we are not interested in stopping him. If we stop him now, the public loses faith in the project, the stock tanks, and we lose money. We need the project to finish, but we need to be insulated. My brow furrowed. What are you proposing? We want to hire you not as an engineer, but as the auditor. I lowered the phone from my ear for a second, staring at it. The auditor. It was not a role that existed on the corporate organization chart. What does the auditor do? I asked. The auditor, the gravelly voice said, decides who pays when the bridge falls down. The next 3 weeks were a blur of lawyers and non-disclosure agreements. I did not go to a competitor. I did not go to the press. I went dark. I sat in a conference room in a building that did not have a name on the door, reading contracts that were thicker than the phone book. The consortium was serious. They knew Julian was a liability, but they were trapped. They could not fire him without spooking the market. They needed the bridge to open to start recouping their investment, but they also knew I was right. They knew the concrete was flawed. The legal team had identified that Julian had committed a clear breach of fiduciary duty. As a corporate officer, he owed the company and its investors the duties of care, loyalty, and good faith. By willfully ignoring concrete core samples, deleting safety models, and forcing a dangerous acceleration protocol for his personal completion bonus, he had acted in bad faith. This meant his conduct fell outside the protection of the company's insurance policies, exposing him to direct, unlimited personal liability. If the bridge failed, or even if the defect was officially documented, the consortium could legally claw back every cent he owned. They wanted me to manage the trap. Meanwhile, my former vice president was taking a victory lap. I watched him on the financial news channels. He looked radiant. With me out of the way, he bullied the junior team into signing off on the rapid timeline. He fired 2 other engineers who asked questions and replaced them with interns who were just happy to have a job. The stock price soared. He gave interviews about trimming the fat and removing obstacles to innovation. He was the darling of the industry, the man who could build faster than anyone else. He called me an obstacle. He told a magazine that I was stuck in the past. He thought he had won. He thought I was at home licking my wounds, humiliated and blacklisted. He had no idea that I was sitting in an office 4 blocks away reviewing his insurance policies. He had no idea that the people he was trying to impress had given me the keys to his destruction. The tension was not in what was happening, but in what was about to happen. The project was moving into the final phase, the insurance bind. This is the unspoken phase of heavy construction. For a project of this magnitude to open, it requires a catastrophic liability policy. Without that insurance certificate, the government blocks all traffic. This is usually a rubber stamp process. The insurance companies look at the safety certifications, trust the vice president, and sign the paper. Julian was expecting a rubber stamp. He was expecting a low premium. He had already spent the money he saved on the concrete. 3 weeks to the day after the press conference, the announcement went out. It was a direct memo from the consortium to the vice president's office. The memo stated that, due to volatility in global construction markets, the consortium had created a new, independent subsidiary to handle all risk assessment and insurance underwriting for their mega projects. The memo introduced the new director of liability assessment, Keith Vance. The man he had humiliated, the man he had called a calculator, the man he had screamed at in front of the world now had absolute authority over his project. He came to my new office 3 days later. He did not scream this time. He looked small. He stood in the doorway, hesitating. He wore a suit that seemed too expensive for the sweat stains forming on the collar. "Keith," he said. "Director," I corrected him, not looking up from my paperwork. He flinched. He walked in and sat down without being invited. I offered no water. I simply slid a single document across the desk. "This is the new policy," I said softly. He picked it up, his hands trembling. He scanned the pages. I watched his eyes dart back and forth. I saw the moment the numbers hit him. I saw his jaw drop. "This premium is insane," he stammered. "It is 600% higher than our budget. It wipes out the entire profit margin. It wipes out my bonus." I leaned back in my chair. "That is the high-velocity curing surcharge," I explained. "Since you are so confident in your physics-defying strategy, I calculated the actuarial risk based on the honeycomb fractures that I documented." "You cannot do this," he whispered. "You are just doing this to get back at me." "No," I said. "I am doing this to protect the investors. The investors have realized that your decision to ignore my reports and delete the stress models constitutes a severe breach of fiduciary duty. As an officer of this company, you have a legal obligation to act in good faith. Under state law, an intentional breach of fiduciary duty involving safety fraud cannot be covered by our standard corporate liability policies. You face direct, unlimited personal liability. If we sue you for this breach, we will strip away your assets, your bank accounts, and your career before the first car even crosses the bridge. But there is a confidence clause." "A clause?" Hope flickered in his eyes. He did not understand. I did not want his money. I wanted his absolute submission. I pointed to the bottom of page 6. "If the lead project manager, that is you, agrees to personally indemnify the deductible of $210 million and agrees to a daily structural review conducted by my office, for the next 15 years, we will lower the premium to standard rates." He stared at me. "Personally indemnify? You want me to put up my own assets? My stock options? My house?" "If your strategy is as sound as you screamed it was," I said, "then there is zero risk. You told the press I was peddling fear. If I am wrong, you pay nothing. You keep your bonus. You keep your reputation. You just have to sign your name next to your belief." The room was absolutely still. He looked at the paper, then at me, then out the window at the bridge in the distance. The bridge he had built on a foundation of lies. "You are crazy," he said. "I am a calculator," I replied. "Remember? Sign it or the bridge stays closed. The investors sue you for gross negligence and you go to prison for fraud." He reached for the pen, his wrist locked. I watched the tendons strain against his cuff. His gut knew I was right. His gut remembered the honeycomb fractures in the core samples, but his greed was louder than his gut. He gripped the pen and scribbled his signature on the line marked "Primary Indemnifier." He shoved the paper back toward me. "There," he spat. "Are you happy? You got your pound of flesh." "I do not want flesh, Julian," I said. "I want structural integrity. You have your insurance bind. The site can remain open." He stormed out, the hydraulic glass door closing softly behind him. I did not celebrate. I simply opened my laptop and initiated the confidence protocol. The next 6 months were a study in human erosion. The bridge construction finished on the accelerated schedule. Julian pushed the crews to the breaking point. They poured concrete at night. They installed cables in the rain. He was manic. He was checking the curing logs himself. Every Friday, he received an invoice from my office. The premium was standard as promised, but there was a line item for independent structural monitoring. I had installed sensors, strain gauges, accelerometers, and acoustic emission sensors on every critical joint of the bridge. Julian paid for the installation, bandwidth, and servers. He tried to fight the invoices, but the consortium told him to take it up with the Director of Liability Assessment. He stopped calling. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was scheduled for a Tuesday in November. The timing was deliberate, designed to maximize toll traffic numbers for the fourth quarter report. I did not attend. Instead, I watched the live stream from my office. Julian stood on the podium, surrounded by politicians and investors, looking thin and gray under his artificial tan. He shouted into the microphone about bold vision conquering all obstacles, while the crowd cheered. I did not look at him. I watched the suspension cables. The wind was gusting at 45 miles per hour. The bridge deck, which should have cut cleanly through the gale, exhibited a tiny vibration. The rigid, rapid-set concrete was resisting the aerodynamic forces. On screen, Julian paused, gripping the podium as he felt the sway under his feet. Terror broke through his mask. The vibration passed, and he resumed speaking with a high, frantic pitch. He cut the ribbon, smiling in panic. He was a captain who had just launched a paper ship into a storm. The bridge opened to traffic at midnight. Julian immediately received his massive completion bonus, spending it on a McLaren, a yacht, and a city penthouse. But he could not escape. The confidence clause forced him to remain as the lead project manager for the 15-year warranty period. If he resigned, the indemnity clause triggered, seizing his assets. Every morning at 8 a.m, my office sent an automated structural integrity report for Sector 7. He had to acknowledge it daily. By January, the first real test arrived. A storm hit the coast, and winds gusted to 45 miles per hour. I watched the sensor array in my office while Julian refreshed the dashboard on his screen. At 10 in the evening, the sensors in Sector 7 flashed yellow at 60% capacity. The concrete was too rigid to flex. Suddenly, the acoustic sensors registered structural snaps. I dialed Julian. He picked up instantly, breathing heavily. He asked if it was failing. I told him the honeycomb was compressing. He asked if we should close it. I explained his choice: close the bridge and pay the tolls out of pocket, or keep it open and face manslaughter charges if it fell. He hung up and gambled. The wind died down at 5 a.m. Julian emailed me 10 minutes later, claiming I was wrong and the concrete had held. Julian spent the next 2 months in denial, buying a yacht named the Velocity and bragging to the staff. He did not understand material fatigue. Every vehicle and wind cycle created microscopic fractures. By May 18th, the 4-month mark, a red alert flashed on my screen. Sensor B18 in Sector 7 detected a continuity loss. The crack was 4.9 millimeters wide and propagating. The pylon was separating. I called Julian's cell phone while he was driving his McLaren. I told him to pull over. He irritatedly claimed he had a ribbon cutting. I informed him that the confidence clause was triggered due to the fissure. He stammered that they could patch it with epoxy. But I told him the data was already logged on the blockchain server and visible to the underwriters. I told him to check his accounts. Access was denied because the catastrophic defect deductible was $210 million. We had frozen his checking, portfolios, and assets to prevent capital flight. He shrieked that he could not even buy gas. I told him to walk and inspect the cracks. 30 minutes later, Julian burst into my office, soaked in sweat, his tie gone. He collapsed into a chair, begging me to undo the trigger, offering half his bonus. I told him the machine was in motion, and physics did not care about his bank account. The legal dismantling of his life was swift. The consortium's auditors occupied his office. He was not fired, because that would sever his liability. Instead, he remained the responsible party while his assets were stripped. The Maldives house was sold, the yacht was seized at the marina, and his penthouses, watches, and furniture were liquidated. He was left with a small stipend based on the wages of a junior laborer, driving a 10-year-old sedan and shopping at discount outlets. The bridge remained open under temporary bracing and epoxy injections. But Julian was its nurse. He now worked from a portable trailer in the maintenance yard. Every morning he reviewed the stress logs and approved repair invoices. When we had to replace crumbling cables in Sector 7, the invoice of $450,000 was paid directly from his liquidated portfolio. I visited his trailer yesterday. He looked 20 years older, thin, with graying hair. He stared at the monitors, calling me director. I told him the acoustic emissions in Sector 8 were rising and we need a core sample test, which would cost $70,000. He flinched, asking if it could wait for escrow. But I told him physics does not wait. He signed the authorization without arguing. As I turned to leave, I told him he should have waited the extra 18 months for the concrete to cure. He whispered that he just wanted to be a visionary. I replied that he only left a crack. I walked back to my office as the sun set. Below, commuters crossed the bridge, safe because I was auditing, and safe because Julian was paying. He has 14 years and 6 months left of his sentence, watching the bridge and fearing every storm. He wanted to defy nature for a profit, but gravity always collects its debt. I stood at the window, balanced. The humiliation in the auditorium was a lifetime ago. The fire had forged me into something harder than concrete. I am the auditor, and I will ensure the math holds while he pays the price.